Welcome, everyone, to the Sponsor CX webinar, Growing Revenue in Changing Times, How Georgia Tech Athletics is Navigating the Current Landscape. I'll be your host today, Jim Andrews, and I am really thrilled to welcome our guest speaker for today's webinar, Charles Nieves, Executive Associate Athletic Director and Chief Revenue Officer for Georgia Tech Athletic Association. Charles, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Appreciate it, Jim. Happy to be here.
Yeah, let me just give a little background so everybody knows where you're coming from, because you've been doing this now for quite a while, and I think not a lot of people better to address our subject today. Charles actually began his career in collegiate athletics at Georgia Tech. Before he moved on, was a successful revenue generator also at Georgia, at Penn State, Miami of Florida. But he did return to the Flats, to Atlanta and the Yellow Jackets just about 3 years ago now to oversee non-fundraising revenue generation initiatives. So he has under his area of supervision a whole bunch of stuff, including Tech's partnership with Legends for multimedia rights and ticket sales. He's also got ticket operations, external operations, so marketing, fan experience, brand and ideation. He's got communications and public relations, as well as video operations and broadcast services. So pretty busy guy. We're glad you had some time for us this morning, Charles. So yeah, I mean, you like I said, you've spent about, I think, 13 of the past 17 years in those different roles across those universities. So all with the Power 5 institutions, of course. You worked with Learfield as an account executive for corporate partnerships at Georgia. You were manager of business development at Penn State, and then general manager at Miami. But you did manage in between there to also work for 2.5 years in marketing and corporate partnerships at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, their headquarters there in Atlanta. So you got that nonprofit experience. And after your stint in Miami, you went to the brand side for a couple of years as vice president of marketing and team partnerships at Game Day Vodka. So you were leading the brand's launch in, I think it was about 15 U.S. markets. You negotiated partnerships with a couple dozen NCAA and NFL teams. So I love that you've seen this industry and partnerships from all those different perspectives, because that's relatively unique. So let me just start out. I mean, it's kind of a cliche these days to say these are definitely interesting times in college athletics, and I want to dive into all of those different things that are happening. But first, even though it's been now 3 years, I'd still love to talk about how it was for you coming back after being on the brand side and moving back into a revenue generating role. What did you take anything away from that experience that really now kind of informs the way you approach partnerships and the team and the folks you manage at Legends do?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jim. And candidly, it's been fun. I think this has probably been the most transformational time in the history of college athletics, and to be a part of it has been amazing. Spending over a decade on the right side, and then jumping to nonprofit, spirit startup, and now being quote unquote within the athletic department. There's always been a consistent learning curve along the way, but what I've tried to do is leverage each opportunity to make me better for the next. As you can imagine, over time, a ton of context and perspective to build off.
Oh, that's great. Was there something that was unexpected when you went to the brand side that maybe now you look back and say, in my previous roles, I wish I had known that this is kind of what life is like on the brand side? Because I think that's, when we sit in the sales chair, the revenue generating chair, you're always trying to figure out exactly what's going to resonate with somebody who's sitting across the table from us when we're sending them a proposal or we're negotiating a deal. Was there anything that was kind of like eye-opening for you being on the brand side?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just being, pitched as often as we were trying to grow that brand, and watching different sales processes and sellers in general, who would ask the right questions, who wouldn't, who could lead the conversation, negotiation tactics. I hope that I've been able to take from that experience and become a better closer, a better, fact find, representative, someone that can go through the process in a more efficient way so we can get to close, whether that be yes or no, right? And so, what definitely was interesting, listening to a lot of sales folks pitch and sell and kind of in the back of the mind, like, oh, that was a really good question, or I probably wouldn't have led the conversation that way. So, now I take that with me as we go to market and sell various assets. And, what I've tried to become is just a better listener than talker.
Yeah, no, that so important, right? I think that was one of the key things I learned early on taking sales training courses was, especially in those early meetings, it was, 70-30 or 80-20 listening to speaking. And that's really hard sometimes because, we were so excited about the opportunities we're presenting. We kind of want to jump in there and talk about all the great things about our organization. But yeah, it doesn't really work that way, or that's not going to work, I should say, in the long run. But like I said, so many things going on in college athletics. I want to touch on a number of those. I should also, point out to our audience who's joining us. We'd love to have your questions. There is a Q&A button on the right side of your screen. If you want to ask Charles a question, please go ahead and type it in there. Maybe we'll take some along the way. Maybe we'll save some to the end. But if you have a question at any point, just go ahead and feel free to send it using that Q&A function. So, interesting times, right? And that's both the famous blessing and a curse. May you live in interesting times, and certainly that applies across the board to not only college athletics programs, but universities in general these days. So, let's start with a topic I think that right now is generating a lot of buzz, and that is, of course, the jersey patch opportunity, which is brand new for NCAA schools. We've seen a couple of deals. LSU announced their deal with Woodside Energy. I believe UNLV. I don't know if they made it official yet, but I know they had reported that they were waiting on the approval before finalizing a patch deal with a biologics company out there in Nevada. How are you and the folks at Georgia Tech approaching this new inventory? Obviously, it opens up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, incredible opportunity for us, and I think first our approach was just to understand the true value, of the opportunity and investment needed, for the opportunity. So we've done multiple evaluations by independent parties to understand, investment wise where we sit related to Jersey Patch, and then. From there, it's really working collaboratively across your stakeholders, whether that's, your MMR, development, corporate engagement, campus partners, et cetera, just to build a true go-to-market strategy. We truly believe here at Georgia Tech that we sit in a unique position to maximize opportunity, given, our students, the human capital we have on campus, some of the brightest in the country, the geographical position that we sit in Midtown Atlanta, major, tech and corporate hub, top 7 DMA, but also the amount of entrepreneurs that have graduated from the Institute and have gone on to be extremely successful business people by starting companies. And so, we're extremely concerted with our effort of targeting companies that we feel fit the profile of alignment for Georgia Tech. And, hopefully within the next couple months, we'll be able to land one.
That's great. And this may be a little bit, I would say, an unfair question because, who knows how those kinds of conversations are go. But do you see it more as probably an opportunity for a company that you're not currently working with, or could it be someone that's a current partner who might want to add that into kind of their portfolio?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we're having conversations on both sides of that coin, right? I think, regardless of whether it's a current partner or, a prospect that we're engaging, they've got to see the value in the investment. So, the work needs to be done on the front end to be able to build a relationship and have conversation that gets us to, the investment needed. And so I don't want to jinx it, so I won't say either or. Happy to have either, right? Or, and go from there.
Yeah, awesome. Just real quick, you mentioned alumni, and that is something that I know that other schools that I've worked with, consulted with, it is that targeting kind of those alumni who are business owners, entrepreneurs, that you've got a connection there that somebody else who's coming from a pro team or any other organization doesn't have. Is that something that is kind of when you're making your prospect lists and kind of figuring out, okay, how are we prioritizing who we're going to talk to? Is that kind of alumni base of people who are either have their own companies or senior executives at companies? Is that something that you look for?
Yeah, it's a great place to start, right? And I think there's an affinity there, obviously for obvious reason that makes it easier to have the conversation. When you get to investment levels that are at this point, there has to be more than just the marketing initiative behind it and or the brand visibility, right? There has to be some understanding of what makes Georgia Tech special, right? And no better place to start that conversation than with someone who went to school here, graduated from here, and then attributes maybe some of their success to the time they spent here on the flats. Yeah.
And it's that can be a little bit tricky sometimes too, right? Because you don't ever want in some cases, a founder or CEO or C-suite person is going to say, I want to do this deal. You don't want it to be for the wrong reasons, right? You don't want them, somebody coming in and just doing it because they're an alum, because at some point, people in their organization are going to be the ones that have to execute that. And, they've got to believe in it and they've got objectives trying to hit. So sometimes, those can be a little bit tricky to manage, but certainly an advantage, like you said, if you have someone with high up in an organization that has that kind of affinity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Naming rights obviously is another area. I'm really interested to talk to you about it because you have a very unique partnership there with Hyundai for Bobby Dodd Stadium at Hyundai Field. I would love to have you kind of take us, behind the scenes of that one a little bit and how that came together, because it's really a prime example of something that I think we're going to see a lot more of, and that is those campus-wide partnerships where it's not just the athletics department going out and doing a deal. So I'd love to have you kind of dig in and talk to us about that partnership.
Yeah, it was a fun one, to watch it come together and help build it. Most partnerships, in my experience in college, tend to have ROI focused on consumer engagement and or retail traffic or the likes, and one would say B2C, right? And increasingly, even more, you're starting to see more B2B relationships emerge. Hey, we'll do this business back. Where can we make that happen? This is unique in a sense that it's truly what we'll call B2R, right? Business to research, right? And so, the field naming piece of it is a small piece of really what we've got going on at the Institute with Hyundai. And that was really driven by our partners within corporate engagement, right? In conjunction with, Hyundai's $12 billion investment in EV manufacturing and batteries in the state of Georgia, right? And so we've collaborated, not only on the sponsorship side, the naming rights side here in athletics to be able to be that front porch and tell the story, but on research and applications to support a sustainable future as it relates to mobility and hydrogen energy, and to really make cities smarter and more sustainable. So, needless to say, it's just a really cool partnership and one that, doesn't happen without us using the Institute resources that we have at our disposal.
Yeah. When you mentioned, so corporate engagement, so that's a university department, right? So
correct.
How often now are you kind of you or other folks, either you or the Legends team or other folks in athletics, really kind of working kind of cross departmental with something like that? Because I know, again, and I'm old enough, go back decades with some things. I mean, that was always in a lot of universities something that was very siloed, and it was difficult to, if you kind of knocked on the door of corporate engagement and said, hey, we want to talk to this company, it was kind of like, no, they're ours. Has that, my impression is, and obviously with the Hyundai example is a good example, that has changed, right? That there is a little bit more of that kind of conversation, communication, partnership between departments. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to leadership and alignment, right? And here at Tech, and I've seen it, work really well places and not so well places where it was a silo. You walk in and you're like, hey, what about your prospect list or your procurement list or whatever you're asking for, and it's like, nope, this is my baby. Here, from President Cabrera all the way down, we've got alignment on making sure that athletics can compete at the highest level, right? And so we're in weekly conversations, if not daily, with campus partners across the entire institute, corporate engagement included, of who are you talking to? What are you talking about? Where does it make sense for us to talk about sponsorship in addition to? And it's yielded plenty of conversations, obviously the most visible of which is our Hyundai relationship, but many more have come to fruition based on, whether it's relationships with corporate engagement or our campus services, student services, or, even our rec center, right? And so I think, one of the, key things that we've tried to do here is break down those silos and make sure that everyone understands that the success of athletics makes a more successful institute.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we can't talk about college athletics these days without talking about everybody's favorite topic, it seems like, and that's revenue sharing with athletes, NIL deals. That's obviously changed a lot of the dynamic and focus. How is it for you? Has that impacted kind of your role and particularly the conversations with your current partners or your prospects? This ability to now kind of bring the athletes in, but yeah, just tell me how those conversations may have changed.
Yeah, I mean, they've changed significantly, and not in a disruptive way per se, but just they've just become more complex, right? You just have more to sell, more inventory. The athletes have become part of that rate card, if you will. So I think on the front end there is an education component. The landscape has changed significantly. Not only just in the past 3 years, but in the past 8 months, right, with house settlement. So it's definitely become part of our partnership offering. But that said, what's become more evident is the word I just used, in alignment, right? Like everyone has to be on the same page, across the entire athletic department about, one, we're all revenue generators. Two, where is it best to seat that revenue, and what conversation is best to be had, right? And so whether it's the chips we sell in venue or the next donor we're trying to get on for the annual fund, we've got to make sure that we understand what revenue buckets are most important for us, and as we have those conversations, to be able to bring in our peers that can help us get to where we need to be. Essentially every decision we make across the board, top to bottom, needs to have revenue sharing, NIL, and et cetera in mind.
Yeah, of course. Before I move on to my next question, there's a question that popped in from John, and it basically is asking if you used any outside companies to evaluate the jersey patch opportunity. I'm going to guess that he's talking about the valuation and figuring out what that's worth. And would you be comfortable talking about naming any of if you did work with an outside firm, who you did?
We did. I'll keep it confidential, but we have one from our rights holder that the league has participated in one, and then we've leveraged an outside company. I think the goal there was to get various perspectives, right, and understand at various levels where we sat, and coincidentally enough, they all landed in a very similar spot, which made us really excited about the opportunity that we have here at TED.
Yeah. I mean, that's I remember doing some of that work when the NBA first introduced jersey patches, and I'm thinking, gosh, it would be so much easier now, because at least there's a lot more comps now than 8-9 years ago, whatever that was. We were looking at this going, what is this 2x2 inch piece of inventory really going to be worth? And now we have a little bit more information to work with. So
absolutely,
yeah, thanks for addressing that. You mentioned, obviously, and then I mentioned you've been on the MMR rights partner side with Learfield. Now you're managing the relationship with Legends. I would love to hear your insights on just how that kind of push and pull works, because you've got to be collaborative. It's not a sense. I think some people might think, the athletic department kind of turns that all over to someone like Legends, and then check in every Friday. Did you make any sales? No. Okay, call me next week. That's not the way it works.
Yeah, I mean, and that may be how it works at some places. I think given my background, probably not so much here, and so definitely a push pull, and a big part of it is really how do we find synergy, right? To live in a space, as you mentioned, of collaboration. Just because I've had success elsewhere doesn't mean it has to be done my way or a certain way. And, I think above all, I'm here to support and help drive our mission and revenue forward, whether, I'm coming in on the back end to help close the deal or sitting, with our marketing group and our rights holder, brainstorming opportunities to go sell. I'd like to think that, I could be leveraged as an asset to help reach, our revenue goals. And, over the past 3 years, we've done extremely well growing that revenue pot. So, again, I'm excited to be a part of it and have a different perspective, whether it be from the multimedia rights or brand side. And, as much as possible, try to just leverage opportunity, whether it be, me coming to the table, helping them in any type of way, just as an asset to their group and an additional player on their team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I'm thinking about, Charles, is because I'm looking at who we've got on the call with us, and a lot of folks, I think, again, I'm going to ask you about this a little bit later, your experience on the nonprofit side, but I think a lot of times we look at a Power 5 collegiate athletic program, we say, okay, those guys, they're kind of at the top of the food chain compared to, a smaller or, non-sports event, museum, symphony, whatever that might be. But also, you also are in a very competitive geographic marketplace in Atlanta, right? You've got, the Falcons and the Braves and the Hawks and everybody else, and the University of Georgia down the road. So is there a way that you kind of communicate the Georgia Tech kind of brand proposition in, I don't want to say in opposition, but, recognizing that, those other major properties are also probably talking to some of the same folks that you are. How do you is there a unique selling proposition for Georgia Tech?
Yeah, I think what we've tried to do, particularly over the last few years, is really value prop the assets that we have on campus and access to our students. I could look out, the window here on North Ave and see multiple Fortune 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 companies, and all of them have logos facing our campus for a reason, right? And it's to recruit our student body. So when you think about value prop, in addition to performance on the field, which we're excited has gotten a lot better over the past couple of years, particularly in football. But access to that student body is what we've led with the most and been able to get us indoors. We just, maybe a little non-traditional from a sponsorship perspective, but we haven't had conversations with, in the past. And so, I think just understanding who you are, first and foremost, allows you to compete at a level of success, right? We're not, going to scream from the high heavens of hey, we're going to, from a brand perspective, compete with, certain, peers up and down the road, but, we're going to compete where we can compete that allows us to punch above our weight class. So, the value prop for us, addition to being in Midtown Atlanta, right in the middle of, the college football capital of the world, is what we can bring to the table and what we can be, how we can be additive to companies that are local to this market and also across the country.
Yeah, no, that's great. Speaking of campus, you've also got a stadium renovation that's coming up, and those always create lots of opportunities. So how are you approaching that from kind of a business development standpoint, or certain categories?
Yeah, it's
looking at?
Great question. And in 2024, we launched our full steam ahead campaign, $500 million fundraising campaign to really get us up to speed so we can compete at a championship level. And you talk about peers in the market and or some of our pro teams. We realize while we need to compete on the field with some of our college peers in the conference, in the region, et cetera, from a venue perspective, we probably should look more like the pro venues around us. So this highly anticipated renovation to the oldest D1 stadium in the country will include chairback seating, new premium areas, video board and sound enhancements, and really an opportunity to upgrade the game day experience. And similar to the NIL piece, every conversation we've had has been related to how we can tie that into the fan experience and drive sponsorship, naming rights on new premium spaces that come online, opportunities in the interval to just provide an increased fan experience. Essentially, we look at every aspect of the project as an opportunity to at least have a conversation. Ironically enough, I literally sat in a pitch yesterday with a kitchen, bath, and lighting prospect to talk about the toilets. To say, hey, wouldn't it be cool to sit on the throne and say, do you like this toilet? It's heated. Buy it at XYZ company. So I've been in some unique conversations, needless to say, but I think in today's day in college athletics, where every dollar matters and winning has never been as closely tied to revenue as it's ever been, you have to open up the door to have those conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's again, the great thing about a physical building, whether it's a stadium, arena, whatever it is, because it does open up those kinds of conversations to brands that may otherwise not, there might not be such a fit, but if they can actually put their products into the stadium, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's something like bathrooms, it really does kind of open up a lot of new conversations for you. I guess, is it fair to say that the college sports audience now, your fans, they're looking for those same kind of heightened opportunities in stadium? We see all of the amazing things that are happening in the pro sports venues, and is that kind of putting pressure on you to say, hey, again, you mentioned chair back seats. You and I probably went to school back in the day when you wouldn't even consider it. You're going to sit in bleachers. That's the college football experience. But is that really kind of gone by the wayside? Are we looking at kind of really trying to recreate a similar experience to what they might get at Mercedes-Benz or something else?
Yeah, it was mentioned, in D1 ticker and 80 across the country, mentioned we're walking into the fan experience era, right? Like, no longer can we ask more of our fans without providing more to our fans beyond just wins on the field or the court. So absolutely, it's particularly in a market, like Atlanta, where they can walk or, take an Uber or a scooter a mile and a half down the road and get some of the most premium experiences in pro sports, or go up to, a place like the Battery that the Braves had built and have a, dinner, watch a concert and then go to a ball game, right? And so, as far as competition, again, it's who are we competing with off the field for dollars in the market, right? And so as we build out experience, we have to keep that in mind. And sometimes it's not about recreating the wheel; it's about what's already happening, right? And we've surveyed, we've asked, we've took the pulse of the city, and candidly, the response is, hey, if we had more, we'd give more, right? If the experience was on par, we wouldn't have a problem doing that, right? And so that's where we're in the process of closing the gap, and where the opportunity resides in the future as well.
As I said, you're kind of the perfect person to be talking to today, because you got all these things, the new stuff that's happening down at Georgia Tech. The last one, not unimportant, of course, is your new exclusive apparel agreement with Under Armour. That's coming up. It's a 10-year deal. It's going to start July 1st, so right around the corner. Talk to us a little bit about that, and how that came about, and kind of what's that like, making that transition from one apparel partner to another. That's a pretty big switch.
Yeah, definitely a ton of transformation the past 3 years. A lot of balls in the air, as you can imagine. I'm excited to have landed a few of them, and we're extremely excited about our future with Under Armour. What most may not know is, Georgia Tech and Under Armour already have a pretty special relationship. Back in 1996, when Kevin Plank was launching the compression shirt business, he was down to his last few coins, and our longtime equipment manager, Tom Connor, placed the first team order for $10,000 that changed the trajectory of the business, actually saved it. So to finally have an official partnership, we're extremely excited about that. I think for us, we wanted to make sure, as our athletics performance continued to rise and the visibility of the program continued to rise, so did our retail footprint. More gold in the market, more footprint across big box stores. In this day and age, more student athlete engagement in the form of NIL, and really just a partner that wanted to play ball with us in the market. Such a special market when it relates to sports, culture, and all things considered. So, right now, we're in the process of transitioning out of our old provider, and at the finish line of jersey design and how we're going to launch and do cool things around that, July 1st time frame. But we're positioned as a pillar within their portfolio, and so I'd say right time, right place, right partner, right opportunity.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. That's great. I'm going to ask you my traditional last kind of question, Charles, and then I see we've got some questions popping in, so keep those coming in. Some folks are putting it in the attendee chat, some put it in the Q&A, so I'll find them. Don't worry about that, but just keep typing those in. I see some interesting ones. But I always like to wrap up my portion of these webinars with what I call the myth to bust or fact to trust. And again, given your experience at the Boys and Girls Clubs, and I know you're still, you keep an eye on what's happening in that nonprofit cause space. I'd love to get your opinion on kind of this statement, which I hear, fairly often. Selling sponsorships for traditional charitable organizations is vastly different from selling sponsorship for a sports-driven property, a team, a league, an athletic department. Is that a fact, or would you say there is more similarity that would make that statement more of a myth?
Yeah, I think, somewhere in the middle, right? And one of the things that we did at Boys and Girls Club during my time there that has continued to make it one of the most prominent nonprofits in the country is we, took to market our fundraising and sponsorship business, as an external marketing agency. And so you would find oftentimes that we would start with the foundation, building programs that support youth across the country, but end with the marketing team of, okay, that's great. You're going to give $1 million to put kids on youth sports team, but how are we going to tell this story to the entire country, right? And so very mission driven to start, but, had to be able to tell the story. And I think, as we, look at the college sports space and, how we go to market, it's similar. We're here for our student athletes first and foremost. That is the mission, to provide them the utmost student athlete experience, and then also engage our students that support us in a way that makes them want to support us. So we lead with mission and opportunity, but at the end of the day, it still needs to drive ROI for the partner, right? And the same conversations I was having, traveling the country, pitching Boys and the Girls Clubs are very similar to the conversations I've had throughout my sports sponsorship career. If anything, both experiences have helped me align my pitch in a way that, cause marketing just so happens to always find its way in my sports sponsorships. Great, we can do X, Y, Z, but how are we helping the community? And I found that, corporate partners really enjoy that approach, because it's not just about selling a trinket. Good faith and goodwill is something that is important to them as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really interesting, because I certainly hear that from a lot of folks on the pro sports side. It's like, oh, we want to build in a community element, but it's it works at the university level too, right? I think that maybe the first thought is, well, we're the nonprofit here, so let's these things should be benefiting us, and obviously that is true, but universities are major players in their communities. They need to support their communities for many different reasons. So nice to hear that that's kind of the approach that you're taking with your partners as well. Let me look over here, and I see we've got a few questions have come in, and one of them, it looks like, is from Antoine, who's I believe a Georgia Tech alum, and is now at UCF. He was just asking how have you leveraged the Georgia Tech Letter Winners Club? So something he is obviously familiar with. Anything in particular there that you've been able to leverage as you scope out new opportunities?
Absolutely. Kevin Cohn runs our Letter Winners Club. He's a letter winner, himself, and what we've tried to do, similar to any alumni group, is one, find connectivity, right? How do we continue to engage and grow and make sure that we are in touch, have proper communication channels, and are consistently communicating. Next is offer visibility. Come back, talk about your successes, talk about your experience, engage our student athletes. 1% may go pro, but the 99% are going to go to corporate America and do great things. Let's talk about that. and then, how can you, leverage what you're doing today to hire student athletes and get them jobs when they walk across the stage. And, Kevin's done a phenomenal job over the past couple of years, really revamping that. So it's not always just a gimme, 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 but it's a reciprocal relationship. We're making sure we're, again, making sure our student athletes that graduate here are doing great and being productive citizens, but also making it a full circle opportunity for our former student athletes and letter winners to come back and give back to the enterprise as well.
There's a question here about pitches, sponsorship pitches, and it's very, very specific. I'm going to ask you a more general one first, and then I'll get to Joshua's very specific question. Charles, do you find that there's a whether it's for your folks or the folks at Legends, are there certain things that you're doing to kind of open up a conversation? If it's especially if it's more on the colder side of the instead of a warm connection, to be able to get in the door. Are you starting out with just a little bit of information to kind of whet their appetite and see if you can get a meeting, or you're kind of sending a whole bunch of stuff and seeing what sticks? What's kind of your approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, a multitude of ways, right? The why, we should have a conversation. The try to get the understanding of why we haven't had a conversation. Hey, didn't know if we're playing this Saturday. Why don't you come out for a game? To also hey, I saw you were doing this in the market. Tell me more about that, right? The inquisitive approach. I'd say there's a lot of bait you could throw on the hook, and depending on what you're trying to catch, depends on what you throw out there. And so I've seen success with our rights holder a lot of different ways. Obviously, some leads are a little warmer than others, whether it's through introduction, but you can't always rely on that. We're in a big market with a lot of companies. We got to take a lot of shots, right, to make sure we get to where we need to be. And part of that is being able to have a toolkit of approach, right, and make sure that you're not just sending emails over and over and over again. An old school way is really to pick the phone up, right, and or even to walk into the business in some respects. LinkedIn's obviously a valuable tool to gain connectivity and figure out where you have connections. So suffice it to say, there's no one method that I would encourage or that we use to get into the door. It's really whatever works, right? And from there, let the conversation take place and see where it leads you.
Yeah. And persistence always is key in that too, right? I just had a conversation with a friend of mine at another university who we had been talking about an idea. We thought there was a prospective partnership out there that made a lot of sense, and I think it was literally almost the 8th or 9th email follow-up where you're politely persistent, and this had gone straight to the CEO. Again, it was an alumni relationship. And she finally, I got the call the other day. She got back. She apologized for not getting back right away, but obviously she's busy running her business, but she thought, hey, this is actually an idea. We definitely want to follow up on it. So
yeah, and Jim, honestly, the other side of that is knowing when to back off, right? Like knowing when it's time to kind of cool it a little bit and maybe try a different person, different approach, different prospect, right? Like, and so. A little bit of math and science there, right? But there's no right way, right? Like it's only right if you close the deal.
Yeah, exactly. So Joshua's specific question: he's someone who creates video animations for sponsorship. So based on that, he's curious what percentage of pitches would you have pre-made content prepared to show a sponsor versus what percentage would just be kind of spitballing ideas, as he says, hoping to come up with something that they want?
Yeah, these are great questions. And just so all know, I can't see them. So this is, kind of a hot seat model here that we're participating in. But, I'd say a small percentage, but that small percentage are in the pitch process of closer to close, right? And so that's when you start to narrow down what opportunities look like, and you got to get off the emails or get off the PDF and really start to show in live action what an opportunity could look like. And so you never want to get in the business of having your creative team create too much what if, like, hey, I need you to do this for these 8 partners, and maybe one of them closes, because it comes a bit of boy who cried wolf there, right? Like they get a little fatigued, right? And so what I'd say is, as the pitch progresses and you really need to find ways and strategy to close the deal, should it head that direction, is that's when you start pulling in some of the more integrated pieces of hey, here's what this would look like on the video board. Hey, here's what this signage could look like on the courtside LED, pulling in resources, whether it's the head football coach or the AD, or someone that really aligns with what they're trying to accomplish. You want to make those things special, right, for all involved, the people creating them and the people receiving them. So my recommendation, and really the practice, is let's get it to a certain point in the conversation before we deploy those assets.
Well, and as you say, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd have unlimited resources to just throw everything out, and see what works, and put it all in those earlier on in the conversation. But we all know that, hey, resources are limited. You got to be very strategic about how those get deployed, because otherwise, I remember a few times when we really thought we had something going on, when I was briefly involved in the sales organization, the ESP Properties, and we would, quite frankly, I think there were a few times where we spent way too much money putting together this really great, all the bells and whistles, and it ended up not resulting in a deal, not resulting in a close. It's kind of like, maybe we overshot on that.
a little too early, right? I mean, you got to make sure it's the right time to strike.
No, exactly. And speaking of that too, certainly a question, the topic that comes up with all across our industry these days is AI, and the role that is being played. Obviously, is can help out at various stages of prospecting and putting communications together. How about from your experience, Charles? Is AI a tool that you, and again, maybe the folks at Legends are using more of in building the relationships, having conversations with partners?
Yeah, I think we've seen it, in its infancy in prospecting and finding, answers to who and when and how to engage, certain businesses. But I think as we, move forward, and Georgia Tech is a very AI forward campus in general, really on the leading edge of that. But from an athletics standpoint, how do we leverage it to make better decisions? Whether it's how we recruit, retain, evaluate players and talent, to make sure that we're not missing. Now that we invest, capital into players and pay them, you got to make sure that you're making good investments. And how do we leverage technology like AI to do that? But also, from a fan experience perspective, we're smack in the middle of a city where there could be something on the highway that makes a miserable commute coming into game day, or something that happens at a gate that all of a sudden we're at a significant queue that is hindering game experience. How do you use predictive models and opportunity to use technology to just lift the entire ecosystem? So, while AI may not be able to close a deal for you, and if it can, let me know. I haven't learned that part of it yet. It could absolutely get you to, whether it's a warmer prospect or better fan experience, or the path to winning when it comes to the student athlete performance a lot quicker.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so much on both sides of those, and I know I've seen it with the prospecting, just being able to surface some brands that may not have been on anybody's radar screen, but AI can find a connection and say, hey, this might be somebody you want to talk to, and here are the reasons why. I mean, that's just, and I think that's we're seeing so many what I would call non-household names come in and start to do deals and sponsorship, which to me is really exciting, right? You're kind of building a deeper and wider pool, and not just having to go back to the Anheuser-Busch's and the Coca-Colas and all those folks, but definitely keeps it interesting, because some of those brands that are out there, maybe their first ever foray into sponsorship. So you got to kind of hold them by the hand and bring them along and teach them as well as, sell them. Kind of thing.
Yeah, and candidly, for someone like me, they may have to teach me, like, what do you do? What is this? Like, how does your business work? And I'd probably have to bring in folks that are way smarter than me sometimes to help translate and get us over the hump. So the game is definitely changing in that regard. I'd say it's getting a little more sophisticated as it relates to the prospects and partners that we're engaging.
Yeah. I see we've got one more question that's popped in, and if anybody has a final question for Charles, go ahead and put it in the Q&A now. But this is a big, important, and broad question, Charles. I hope you're ready. What are your predictions for what will continue to change in sponsorship over the next 2 to 5 years? So obviously that's looking in our crystal balls and seeing what we think is coming around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to college specifically, I think, technology, as we just mentioned, is something that is going to increase, as it relates to sponsors and opportunity with sponsors. College space has typically been late adopters to industry, following pro, and a lot of that is just, you don't have an owner that, can invest millions and millions of dollars in just unlimited resources into whether it's flipping a building, adding technology or into, player personnel. So, how do we build relationships in that specific vertical that produce ROI for those partners and understand, how to leverage those type of businesses to make us successful. And then obviously NIL and rev share is still extremely fluid, right? How do you engage talent and micro influencers in a way that is beneficial to businesses? Obviously, there are always going to be those 1 to 2 to 3 players across the country that you could put up a billboard in anywhere USA and someone will notice their face. But for the most part, it's not like that. However, we do have an ecosystem now where we have the opportunity to leverage our student athletes. And so, I'd say, the most transformational piece over the next 2 to 5 years is going to be, how much of a role that becomes part of the traditional sponsorship and how it's leveraged to drive ROI for brands.
Terrific. You mentioned ROI, and just really quickly, are you seeing more? I don't want to say pressure is not the right word, but are your partners having more conversations about, hey, we really need to prove the ROI on these partnerships, and looking to you and your team to kind of help them figure out what they're getting out of all of these deliverables that you're giving them?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of that work's done on the front end. Like, what do you need to get out of these deliverables? And based on that type of information, I'll put together a deal that I know is going to help serve that, right? And so I think what happens over the long term though is the perception and the reality of ROI changes for businesses, right? And are you in a position to change the inventory and to be able to adapt to those businesses, right? And so I think with us, we are in constant conversations with our partners, not just during renewal season, but hey, how did last year work for you? Did we miss on anything? What really worked? How was your business? What are you doing well? What are you not? How can we help, right? And oftentimes that results in swapping out inventory as new inventory comes online, as inventory sunsets, as inventory becomes really important and less important. Just being able to have those fluid conversations with your partners as to what makes most sense for them allows us to be successful at retention, successful at growth, and ultimately have a successful organization.
Yeah, no, it's so important. I know speaking with the Sponsor CX folks about how they work with their clients on the fulfillment reports and getting that reporting and putting it into dashboards. And again, so amazing to me to see the things we can do today versus the way things used to work. And again, I don't want to sound like an old man, but I am. I think that's it helps professionalize the whole industry, right? We can use those kinds of tools to say, hey, here's actually what's happening, and then we can go in and say, maybe we need to swap some stuff out. And again, not waiting until the end of the term, but doing it midterm if that's if there's a need or their objectives have changed. So yeah, great to be able to stay on top of that. And again, can only help renewals if you're doing that kind of thing. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, Charles, again, really appreciate you joining us, taking the time today to share some of your experiences and your expertise. And we'll certainly be paying attention, watching to see what's happening down there in the flats, and with maybe new patches and everything else going on. And good luck with the renovation. And I'm sure that's got to be exciting for you. And again, just can't thank you enough for taking the time this morning. Really appreciate it. Just a quick reminder to everyone who joined us today. If you ever have follow-up questions, you're like, oh, maybe I should have asked this during any of our webinars. We have actually a LinkedIn group, a Sponsor CX LinkedIn group called Sponsorship Central. You can go in there and continue the conversation. Laura just dropped a link there in the chat. We can join the group, and so the folks at Sponsor CX, myself, we kind of monitor that and answer any follow-up questions that you have. Be happy to do that. Also, just another reminder, 2 weeks from today, we'll have our next webinar, and that is coming up. So that's March 10th, and that is going to be with Wahaj Tariq. Wahaj is the Senior Director of Integrated Marketing and Insights for the New York Islanders. So he and I are going to be talking all things data, and really looking at not just from a pro sports perspective, obviously that's where he's coming from, but just for properties in general. You know, what's not necessarily new in data, but what's really important in getting your data aligned, and again in the context of partnership conversations, whether it's prospects, whether it's existing partners. He's a great guy to do that. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation in a couple of weeks. So for now, we'll say, again, thanks to Charles, and thank you to all for joining us. Take care.
Appreciate it, Tom.